So before I start, one of the things I'm just going to ask everyone to do is to follow Translash. So you can either go to Instagram right now, and the handle is translash.org. And I'm going to put it in the, I'm sorry, Translash. Oop, I gave you the wrong line. It's Translash Media is the handle on IG. And then, or you can go to translash.org and sign up for our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter, and in the newsletter, a lot of times we are spotlighting political issues, political candidates. Thank you, Marie. Thanks for the follow. We are spotlighting candidates. We are spotlighting trans issues. We are spotlighting trans legislation, which I'm going to touch upon, or anti-trans legislation, which I'm going to talk about and touch upon. So please make sure that you do that. For everyone who loves podcasts, you can follow our Translash podcast, and we have lots of political leaders on the Translash podcast. Various people that we've interviewed are Deb Haaland, who is the new Secretary of the Interior. We interviewed Maureen Turner, who is the first non-binary person elected to a state legislature in U.S. history. Sarah McBride has been on our podcast, who is the first trans person elected to a state senate, has been on our podcast. And so politics and political leaders and the conversation around trans lives are central to our podcast. Oh, Maureen and Sarah, yay. I'm glad that they've joined you all. So subscribe to the Translash podcast wherever you get your podcasts, so that you can do that. So I just wanted to put a plug in for Translash, and I think given who you all are and what you are concerned about, there's a lot of our content that's going to resonate with you and be really important as a part of your both political education as well as your political communication with your peers and about what's important. So I'm going to touch a little bit about where we are in trans life right now, because it's deeply tied to politics, and then I can talk about why I do what I do. Because when I first started out in my career, I thought I was going to be in politics. One of my first jobs out of graduate school was going to work in the White House on international economic issues, and I thought that was going to be my career. And I can talk a little bit about why I am doing what I'm doing right now, and how for me my work is political. So one of the things I think that's really important is that it's impossible right now to be a trans person in the United States and to not be political. And that's because our lives are politicized. And not only our lives are politicized, but our very existence is politicized. And that started in focused, well, forever, but became a huge focus during the Trump administration, where the Trump administration became obsessed with our bodies, became obsessed with our ability to get an education, became obsessed with our ability to be able to get housing, became obsessed with our ability to be able to get equal access to healthcare, became obsessed with our ability to serve equally in the military, and in every single way politicize trans people in a way that I think is hard to remember a time when it's been so political. So I want to be clear, I'm not talking about marginalization. Trans people are the most marginalized of the marginalized, and there are lots of statistics that I could go into on that. So the marginalization isn't new. But what's interesting is the politicization of us is what is interesting and new, right? And so when you combine that extreme marginalization and then that politicization together, that is a community that's under assault. And during this time of the Trump administration, I realized that what fueled a lot of people's ability to become obsessed with whether or not we were using bathrooms, whether or not we were using or accessing or having equal rights as everyone else. A and by the way, the Trump administration, their ultimate act in 2020 argued before the Supreme Court that trans people are not covered by civil rights laws in the United States, should not have equal rights. And I realized that one of the reasons why people were able to become obsessed and to believe some of these things is because they didn't actually know who trans people are. Now, everybody on this call is of probably either late millennial or Generation Z, so that's not really an issue. Everybody on this call knows someone who is either trans, gender nonconforming, or non-binary, period. And so that's not really an issue for so many people. I mean, my cousins who live in a small town in Southwest Georgia have trans kids in their high school. So, it's not their issue. But for 9 out of 10 Americans, it is. 9 out of 10 Americans don't actually know somebody who is trans. Can you believe it? And so when you have that lack of knowledge about a community, it is ripe for political exploitation in order to drive a certain agenda and a certain narrative. And so that's when I started Translash to combat that. I became obsessed and thought it was really important to tell first my own story, which we did through some documentaries, and then to tell the story of the broader trans community and then the country that we live in, this political environment, because all of those things are working together right now. And then I realized over time that it wasn't enough just to tell that through video documentary, because as you all know, each of you probably consumes a gazillion type of media, right? So you're not only you're on Twitch and you watch TikTok and you binge on Netflix, right? So if we're going to communicate to people, we have to try to communicate to people wherever they are. And that's why our project has grown during this time, because we focus on video and we focus on podcasts. We have a zine that's coming out in June. And I know that this is a zine type of audience. So if you subscribe to our website, subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do on our website, you'll know when it's coming out and be able to access all the good content that's gonna be in there. And so, Nick, it's in June, coming out on June the 6th. So subscribe to the newsletter and you'll get it automatically, actually. It'll be delivered to your inbox. And so we realized we had to talk to everyone in all these ways. And so our project just has continued to grow, and we want to continue to do that in so many ways. I would love to figure out a way to work with gamers. I would love to figure out how to do so much more. And so what started in the Trump administration has only grown. And now, as you all know, there are nearly 3 dozen states in which there are dozens of bills that are pending that explicitly target trans people and target trans youth, that target your friends, that target the people that you know. And how are they doing that? Well, they're doing that in 2 ways. First, by seeking to say that trans youth shouldn't be able to compete in sports, shouldn't be able to compete in sports, and are demanding that people undergo very invasive, very embarrassing medical examinations to prove to a board of people who are not medically certified that they are actually the gender of who they are. Now, I can guarantee you who's going to get caught up in that, and that's going to be women. And why do I know that? I know that because right now there's actually gender testing in the Olympics. Trans people actually can compete on Olympic teams and in Olympics, by the way. But if there is any gender confusion, people have to undergo gender testing. And the only people that undergo gender testing in the Olympics are women. Men don't undergo gender testing. And it'll replicate what happened on the bathroom bills. One of the reasons why the bathroom bills, you don't hear about them, is because the states where they implemented them, women who were cis women would enter bathrooms and were policed by other people who looked at you and judged whether or not they thought you were woman enough to be in the bathroom. So these trans athlete bills are going to mostly be targeting women, and they're going to force women of all ages, I guarantee you, to undergo, all types of invasive medical examinations that just will continue the obsession that the government has with women's bodies and the control of women's bodies. The second way that they do that is saying that trans teens shouldn't have equal access to healthcare. That a trans teen could walk into a doctor's office and the doctor's office say, I don't want to treat you, and that's that. And then on top of that, they would say that if a trans teen wants to slow down puberty or slow down the way that their body is unfolding, that they couldn't do that even if it was in consultation with a doctor and a psychologist and all of the other things that you do. So again, putting the government in the middle of medical decisions. For the past year, my team have been doing a deep dive into all these bills and where they're coming from. And it shouldn't surprise anyone on this call that all of these bills aren't coming out of the ether. They're coming out of the right wing. And they're coming out of 4 organizations in the right wing. And we've actually developed a limited series podcast that's also going to come out in June that explains all of this, that explains the organizations that are behind the anti-trans backlash, that explain where these bills come from, that explains where the money comes from to drive all of that, that explains where the lawsuits are coming from. And the exact same people that are obsessed with trans bodies are the same people that are obsessed with abortion, are the same people that are obsessed with allowing corporations to be able to have the same status or have more rights even than people. It's all of these right-wing organizations that that you know really well are the ones that are obsessed with trans rights and trans bodies, and the ones that are dumping tens of millions of dollars into this effort to police trans bodies. And all of this just goes to show, which is kind of where I'll wrap on this, which is that where we are on trans rights right now, for some people who are progressives, look at trans rights and trans issues and think that, oh, well, these issues are marginal, right? We have there are actually so many human rights issues in the United States right now, right? We have women's rights. Well, are we going to have the ERA? Are we racism? Is a human rights issue. Poverty is a human rights issue. There's so many COVID and COVID access. There's so many human rights issues. And so a lot of people can look at trans rights and be like, well, that's marginal. That's way down the list on all these things. And I think that one of the things that I tell everyone is that may be true for progressive groups, but for the right wing, the fight against trans rights is central to them. It's an essential play for them in the long game of mobilizing the American people around right-wing politics. And so that if we actually care about progressive issues, and that if we actually care about building the future that we all want to live in, then we have to engage this fight on these trans bills. We have to engage this fight across the states, because for them, this is an effort that they have spent the past 2 decades in, where they have dumped almost $100 million in building up the organizations that are now leading this fight. And so if we don't think that it's central, then they're going to win, and it's going to set us all back. And so I really want to leave you all with that thought, and to pay attention to what's happening with these bills and the language and the way in which they're explicitly targeting young people. One of the people that we had on our podcast was Cece Telfer, who a trans from who won an NCAA double championship 2 years ago when she was 19, the first trans woman to win an athletic competition. And she was targeted by Donald Trump Jr. And at age 19, she was getting death threats. She's a sophomore in college, right? Was at the time. And the callousness of centering and being willing to expose and target and risk the lives of young people to advance a political agenda is really a political force in the United States that we can't tolerate. So I wanted to leave you all with that as a main idea. Also, really quickly, I know I'm probably running over. One last thing is, for me, one of the reasons why what I do in storytelling and politics are so linked is that essentially, politics is the business of storytelling. And I want you to think about that as just as much as you're concerned about the issues and the facts and what the policy is and what the outcomes are and what the science says. All that stuff is really important, but you've got to find a way to turn that into a comparative narrative that's going to move people in their heart and their soul. And that as progressives, a lot of times what happens is that we think that we're right on the facts and that should be enough. But I think we are really clear that that's not enough for a lot of people, that some people are willing to risk their lives to continue a narrative that resonates with them more than they're willing to listen to facts and science. So what are the stories that you're going to highlight? And what's the language you're going to use? And how are you going to reach people kind of in their heart and soul with the messages that are going to move them on all the issues that you care about? That's just as important as everything else that you're doing as activists, that you'll do for the rest of your lives as politicians, as policymakers, as communicators, no matter what you do. And so you have your work cut out for you. And if other people had figured it out, we'd be in a different place in this country. So it really is a challenge on you, on me, to figure out how to do that on all the things that we care about. And with that, because I have gone over time, I am going to end and just congratulate you all for caring about people, for caring about this country, for caring about each other, and for figuring out what is the best way for you to get involved and to continue the fight for justice and equality in this country. We need you, and I'm so glad that I've been able to spend this time with you guys.